Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum at the Wilson Center, where I've been hanging out for almost 25 years now. Big focus of our work is actually, the DNA of our project is focused on US-China climate relations. And a lot of it too, we also been sailing, we're going to be sailing the seas today. We have a project called Sailing to the Edge of the Carbon World, decarbonizing shipping from American, Chinese, and European perspectives. Um, so I'm just going to kick us off because, time is short and I want to get conversation going with my speakers and with all of you out in the webland. So over 80% of the world's trade travels by sea, and global shipping has become a major greenhouse gas emitter, making up about 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's only getting bigger. Trade is growing, the ships are getting ever bigger. I live in Maryland. We discovered recently when actually evidently not that big of a cargo ship smashed into one of our bridges and annihilated it. So shipping is getting bigger. There's a lot of debate on how we can go low carbon in shipping. And so my three speakers today are going to map out some of the efforts in the US, EU, China, and beyond on decarbonizing shipping. They're going to highlight some of the complex ownership, management, and political issues surrounding shipping that makes this decarbonization perhaps a bit challenging. To kick us off today, we have Christian de Berkeley, who, when he's not sailing or swimming in the ocean, I just found out he just got out of swimming in the ocean. He's a senior lecturer in culture and climate at the University of Melbourne. He's doing a fellowship at the Necessary Utopias at Amera, which is an institute at the Advanced Study at Marseille University. Don't have me say French that much, okay, guys? And there he's working on his current research project, Shipping in the Oceanic Commons, Regulation and Prefiguration. He recently completed a book, and Stephen's going to wave it for me, because I lent him my copy. It's called Trade Winds, A Voyage to a Sustainable Future for Shipping. I read about a third of it, and then I went to China and I lent it to Stephen. I want it back next week. Great storytelling. So he's going to start us off today, and he's going to talk about the how and why shipping has become such a major greenhouse gas emitter, and talk about kind of an unexpected older technology that could be a possible solution. Now, second speaker is going to be Stephen Jackson, who, besides waving books, he's a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. He was a professor of political science at Indiana University of Pennsylvania for 29 years. He retired last summer and really excited. He came to the Wilson Center last fall and has been affiliated with my program. He's got a really cool project called China's Waters, Foreign Relations and Hydropolitics. And we were talking a couple months ago when he was working on his shipping chapter, which basically was an inspiration for this meeting. So I hope you all enjoy it. And if we don't, we just blame you, right, Stephen? So he's going to talk about the evolution and the political challenges for the International Maritime Organization to reach this ambitious goal of decarbonizing shipping by 2030. All right. Last but not least, we've got Xiaoli Mao, who's from the International Council on Clean Transportation. There, she leads the marine team and is co-coordinator of the hydrogen and fuel cells cluster. She leads and supports the research focused on maritime policies to promote zero-emission vessels, also regulating vessels emissions and making them more efficient. And her regional focus is China, but she does a lot globally. She's going to talk in her initial comments about fuel switching research and engagement that ICCT is doing. All of these people can talk about the IMO and everything. So we're gonna kick it off. We're gonna start with you, Christian. So I'm giving each speaker 8 to 10 minutes. And so I want to point out to the audience that if you look underneath this glorious webinar, there should be a little Q&A box, so you can start submitting questions anytime. All right, Christian, the virtual floor is yours.
Many thanks, Jennifer, for inviting me and convening this webinar as a whole, which I think is very timely and also necessary to get everyone to speak about shipping a little bit more. Because if there's one thing that's happened over the last couple of 100 years is that we've actually started shipping a whole lot more, but we've started kind of relegating those very important shipping activities to the fringes of our cities and our inhabited spaces. And I think in that sense, we've become a little bit sea blind to what's happening at the seas, because most of us likely have far fewer friends and family members who work on ships or who work even in the shipping industry as a whole. And in many ways, the shipping industry is a story that was really a success in terms of economies of scale, because the industry has grown tremendously, as have the sizes of ships and the volumes of cargo transported. And just for comparison, in the mid-19th century, we transported about 20 million tons of goods every year, whereas by now it's closer to 12 billion. So we've increased, the amount of goods we transport by about 500-fold. That's really quite significant, considering that the world's population increased about 8-fold. So yes, there are more people now, but we ship an awful lot more for every human being on the planet. And that, of course, that massive growth also happened at a time when ships moved from wind propulsion, because up until the invention of the steam engine, that was pretty much the only way you could get ships across the ocean, to fossil fuel powered ships. Initially, coal powered steam vessels, and later on, diesel and HFO powered ships that grew ever larger. So what has happened as a result of that massive expansion of scale is basically two things. Of course, ships got bigger and got more efficient per ton mile of goods transported over that time. And now ships are far more efficient than trucks or trains, and especially cargo planes. I prefer really not bringing cargo planes into this too much, because they're really, really quite destructive and make shipping look like the greenest possible, the greenest, option ever. And in many ways it is. But we ship so incredibly much at the moment that those shipping emissions add up to roughly the same as civil aviation. And I think that's important to bear in mind, that yes, we, especially, relatively rich Westerners, we fly a lot, but even with all that flying, shipping is still way more significant. And while it's more efficient, it adds up to roughly the same. And one of the other elements in which shipping and aviation are quite similar, and I think that Stephen will pick up on that in a second as well, is that while it is very much a part of the global commitment as part of climate negotiations to tackle those emissions from both shipping and aviation, they do not easily sit within the country-based approach of either the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Agreement. So within those agreements, the regulatory bodies, the IMO and ICAO, have been tasked to bring down these emissions, and IMO has stepped up its efforts. Now, I'll let Stephen get into the details of that, but of course, in order to get that transition going and get shipping emissions to zero, we need a source of energy or multiple sources of energy to propel ships. And one of the things that will absolutely be necessary is finding a fuel or a fuel system that does not emit any greenhouse gases along its entire life cycle. And that's proven to be quite a challenge. There's a lot of investment in it. There's a lot of effort in making that happen, but it remains a very tricky proposition, because in terms of energy density, in terms of safety, in terms of supply, every fuel has some problems, and finding that balance of that right fuel remains somewhat elusive at this point in time, despite there being a few good options. Now, with that in mind, I started researching the potential of wind propulsion as a strategy of moving away from fossil fuels. And when I started looking into wind propulsion, it was a bit of a niche option that very few people took seriously. And there weren't very many projects that were putting this into practice. And, the only ones that were really operating were traditional, really, really small sailing ships with, run by boutique companies trying to convince the massive shipping industry with extremely powerful incumbents that wind propulsion would be a good option. But at that time, everyone active in that wind propulsion space effectively got laughed out of the room by bankers and shipping executives for the seemingly ridiculous task they were pursuing. Fast forward many years, we now have over 40 big commercial vessels in the water that have wind propulsion technologies. Most of them are retrofitted on existing ships, which and those retrofitted wind propulsion technologies offer relatively small reductions in fuel use and thus greenhouse gas emissions. What is, of course, important is that also new ships are being designed, and some are already in operation, where those fuel savings are much more significant because the hull of the ship and the deck space used for those wind propulsion technologies is a lot better designed, which allows for far greater efficiency of that wind as a propulsive system. And I think it's a really quite crucial to point out that wind propulsion is not an efficiency measure like finding a new type of propeller, but it is actually a propulsive technology. So it is something that works in tandem with the main engine, and they both provide energy for the direct propulsion. It is not something that simply makes the ship more efficient. It combines different propulsive mechanisms. And that idea has been around for decades. During the fuel crisis in the 1970s, quite a few people, started floating the idea of returning to sail. But of course, that crisis, the oil crisis, came to an end quite quickly, and those projects were shelved. In the 90s, some people tried to bring wind-propelled ships to market, but the gap between the cost of those ships and fossil fuel ships were too big for investors to make that jump. And only since the early 2000s and especially the last 10 years have companies, both disruptors and incumbents, really started investing in this technology. And what we see now is a very significant pickup of those technologies across the board. There has been a lot of publicly supported R&D. Some companies have put in a lot of their own funding and time in finding solutions that work for them as a company. And I really believe that with the 40 plus vessels that we have in the water now, we're at the cusp of a major pickup of these technologies across the board, which include contracts going to Chinese shipbuilders, but also Chinese companies developing their own technologies as complementary systems to the primarily European investments that have been made in recent years. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot more to say, but I think we'll leave it to the complementary contributions of Stephen, Shaoli, and myself to get the conversation going. Thank you.
I have to plug your book again. You guys got to read his book because he actually sailed on one of these ships. Is it too much of a giveaway what happened at the beginning, Kristen?
Of course not. I joined the ship as a researcher in early 2020, in February 2020, to be clear. And of course, I think you might remember what happened in March 2020. As a result of that, along with, you know, 1.5 million other seafarers, I got stuck on the cargo ship I was on. And you can see the small sailing ship. That's the one I was on, not the big container ship.
Yeah.
And I planned to be on board for about 3 weeks, but it ended up being about 5 months, which obviously gave me a bit of a very profound insight into the social and practical dynamics of those traditional vessels, which allowed me to write this book as a travel story, which brings in my research. So yeah, I hope
Yeah,
you
I
might
just
enjoy
want people
that.
to know I mean, don't be intimidated because it's like shipping, decarbonizing. Could sound a little boring to some people. Not a boring book, and none of you are boring in your work. Stephen, do you want to open up your PowerPoint
Okay.
to tell some stories about the IMO, which regulates global shipping, in case you guys don't know. And we got it going. Okay.
Okay.
Looks great. Click away and talk.
All right. Again, my name is Steve Jackson, and I'm going to be talking about decarbonizing shipping and the politics of getting serious on this. This is a chapter in the book that I'm just about finished with called China's Waters, Foreign Relations and Hydropolitics. And this chapter was actually the one that I found most interesting to write, simply because, you know, it's a fascinating sector about which not that many people know. And so I got to learn a lot, which was really the great benefit. Now, the outline of the talk, basically, I'm going to start off with kind of 2 points. Number one, the fact of the matter is that the shipping world and the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, have been very slow and very low in their carbon goals until very recently. Number two, this has changed, and it's changed for a number of factors. First of all, a popular recognition of shipping's carbon footprint that really can be dated to about 2009. Secondly, the European Union's carbon trading system. And third, that key national positions may be changing. So let's go to the shipping world. The shipping world is an interesting one because it has been denationalized. In the 19th century, when there were sailing ships everywhere, most of those ships had flags, and those flags represented the owner, the builder, the crewing, the insurance, all of the aspect of that ship was hanging in a piece of cloth at the stern. That is no longer the case, and that really occurred after World War II, when this idea of the flag of convenience, or open registry as they prefer to call it, came into being. And so Panama, Malta, Liberia, Marshall Islands, St. Kitts and Nevis, Bahamas, and then my favorite, Mongolia, has a major shipping registry. When I first saw that when I was on a boat in Shanghai in 2004, I saw this Mongolian flag hanging off a ship, and I said, that can't be true. And the home port on the back of it said Ulaanbaatar. What's up with that? The idea is that you can go to a small firm, which is out by Dulles Airport, and register your ship, even though the owner lives in another place. And so you've broken that national identity there. And the great example of this is this ship, the Ever Given. Okay, in 2021, this was the big ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. And it was stuck there for 6 days. And we all know this because we were all sitting at home on Zoom, waiting for our stuff to arrive. Shipping is how our stuff gets to us. None of us go out and buy ships, but all of us, in a sense, utilize ships because that's how the stuff gets here. But the Ever Given is an interesting one by itself, and was built in Japan. It has a Japanese owner. The engine was made in Germany. The flag is Panamanian. The company that hired the crew is in Germany, but the crew was from India. And, so whose ship is this? And this is one of the reasons why shipping had been fairly slow in getting on with environmental and decarbonization initiatives, is because, everybody's pointing in a circle there. The International Maritime Organization is the organization that technically, regulates shipping. It was established in 1948. It's headquartered in London, back in the days when Britain ruled the waves. Now has 176 members. And frankly, it's a great example of what might be called in political science, regulatory capture. That is, it's not just countries that are sitting there at the council, it's also shipping companies sitting right next to them. And indeed, that tends to be the dominant voice in the IMO, is the various shipping companies there. Within the IMO, they have a committee, the Maritime Environment Protection Committee, and that's the one that's, in a sense, most important in this story. Now, the carbon issue in shipping, Christian mentioned HFO. That's heavy fuel oil, or sometimes called bunker fuel. And you can see that it's not good-looking stuff. And it doesn't, it's as cheap as can possibly be. But it produces an enormous amount of carbon, enormous amount of sulfur. It's not good for the environment, but when you're out on the seas, this is what you usually fuel up on. Now, in 1997, the International Monetary Fund, having seen the Rio Convention and all of that, decided to study the issue. And their first study tentatively found that shipping probably contributed 1.8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The next study was in 2009, and this one was methodologically better, and it found that it was about 2.7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And this phrase started up, that's equal to Germany. And this is really where, in a sense, in the police lineup of the rogues of carbon dioxide emissions, you have countries were the typical ones, but now you have shipping right there in the lineup. And so it really started, what has sometimes been called a sticky idea. That analogy proved very powerful. They studied again and found that it not only was much more than had previously been the case, but it was increasing for reasons that Jennifer and Christian have talked about. So in 2018, the Maritime Environment Protection Committee decided to have a strategy to, quote, reduce total annual greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2050 compared to 2008, with a target of 40% in 2030. Now, that was the first time that they talked about very seriously doing something here, but it was, given the context of 2018, pretty weak stuff. There was no net zero plan in this 2018 proposal. All the while, you have a new shipping actor coming on. This is the total greenhouse gas emissions, and you can see that China passed the United States in about 2005 in terms of total CO2 equivalent. You can also see that Germany has gone down, and so Germany got to say, by 2018, it's not like us anymore, so they stepped out of the lineup there. The other thing that started to happen was that Chinese shipping started to get really, really big. And one of the things that hasn't been fully appreciated is that China is now, if you combine mainland China and Hong Kong deadweight shipping tons, they are now bigger than Greece. Greece was traditionally, after World War II, the primary the primary beneficial owner. They don't flag that many ships. Again, they use flags of convenience. But China and Hong Kong just this last year surpassed the Greek shipping. And so there's been an enormous increase in the total percentage of shipping owned and by China. Now, China's position in the IMO was that they wanted voluntary national action plans, which has common but differentiated responsibilities. And that was one of the fundamental agreements in 2015 in Paris, is that you can't have a small developing country assign the same burdens that an advanced industrial country would have. This is also the time when you start to see carbon efficiency ratings. So for the first time, the IMO starts mandating, figure out how much carbon this ship is actually emitting in that. And it was also the first time that people started discussing a carbon tax. The International Chamber of Shipping, which is a member of the IMO and which speaks for shipping, initially floated the idea of maybe $2 a ton. The NGOs countered with $200 a ton. So you can see that the positions were fairly far apart. China supported the International Chamber of Shipping's idea on that. Then in 2023, not the IMO, but the UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, released in its annual review of maritime transportation the first national accounting for shipping emissions. And you can see there at the top of the list, China in 2012 was far behind Japan and Greece, behind the United States of America, behind Germany, but now is in the lead. And this really started to put pressure on China because they did increase so quickly and are now in the lead. Germany, as you can see further down, is the only country that's actually radically decreased its carbon shipping footprint. So that's one of the reasons why the EU started moving on this idea of carbon. They started floating proposals in 2021. Then in 2022, they announced that they would have an emissions trading system and start the implementation this year in 2024. Ships to and from Europe have to pay 50% of that. And this really started to push the IMO to create its own system of carbon emission trading, simply because they don't want a separate system in Europe in this case. That all came to a head in July of last year at the MEPC meeting. You can see the protesters in front of the IMO building. Frans Timmermans, who's a Dutchman, said the atmosphere has completely changed. And so they came forward with a resolution to reduce CO2 by 40% by 2040, zero greenhouse gas technology to be 5 to 10%. So the sailing idea, has a manifestation right there, and to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by or around, i.e., close to 2050. And that phrase, which is very awkward, was the negotiations that went into this thing. One final point is that this was one of the first meetings that the small island states showed up to. And in particular, the Marshall Islands has been creating a coalition of countries that are small island states that want a carbon tax to pay into a damage and compensation fund to the most vulnerable countries, of which they are certainly there. This will all come up in September and October, late September, early October, at the next MEPC meeting, and the final vote in 2005. So I think I'll leave it there and say, stay tuned.
Great, thank you so much. One kind of a quick question: is the shipping industry, do they go to a lot of the global climate talks as well?
They primarily go to global climate talks to listen and to know what the initiatives are and how they might affect them. Now, some of them, like Maersk is the Danish company that is the largest single firm there. They're much more out there in front of trying to do something with alternative fuels, and unlike other companies, did not really oppose the idea of a serious carbon levy out there.
Cool. Okay, if you could take down your slides, and then I will thank you. And I think, see, I asked that question, and I had a feeling it would lead directly to you, Xiaoli. So he mentioned fuel switching. So you're gonna just gonna talk, and want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, you could just ask on the chat underneath the screen. Okay, go ahead, Xiaoli.
Cool. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be here to talk about shipping-related issues. Really, as alluded to by the previous speakers, shipping has been sort of behind the scenes for the public. So I'm glad always welcome public discussions on shipping-related issues like the Wilson Center's China Environment Forum. So thank you for organizing this. So a little bit more about who I am and the organization that I work for. My name is Xiaoli Mao. I'm a lead at the International Council on Clean Transportation, or ICCT. I'm a lead at the marine team here. So we are a nonprofit organization that's doing data-driven analysis to support policymakers around the world to help improve the environment and climate performance of the transportation sector. So at the marine team, we do the same, but we focus on the shipping industry. We focus on criteria air pollutants as well as climate pollutants. So what we do here, I would describe as, so we basically do research. If you browse ICCT websites, the pretty much the only product that we produce is our publications. So we are constantly rolling out unbiased data-driven analysis that's with different lenses that's targeting different audiences that you can find to help understand the key issues and to help you make decisions. So at the marine team, I would say we have basically 3 pillars to do our research. So what we want, our goal is to help the shipping industry to decarbonize in a way aligned with the Paris Agreement. That is at least 2-degree aligned and strive for the 1.5-degree aligned decarbonization pathway. So we have 3 research pillars. One is fuel efficiency or energy efficiency. So we understand that as the shipping industry transition away from fossil fuel, any measure that's helping to reduce the fuel consumption is going to be very helpful. And this is by far the most effective greenhouse gas policies that's being implementing at the IMO. Is the various kinds of fuel energy efficiency measures. So we're although the hot topic right now is going to fuel switching, using alternative fuels, we want to make sure that we want to keep the efficiency measures there, because that's cheap to implement, that's very technologically feasible. We want to keep it there. We want to keep it as stringent as possible. So and also these are. We want to also promote bridging technologies that's going to help the transition between now the fossil fuel and to the various sounds very intimidatingly expensive alternative fuels. So that includes what Christian has mentioned, the wind technology. So one of the technologies that we've been focusing on or researching is the rotor cells. Those can be, those are really, those are there, those are cost effective, those can be installed on ships to reduce any amount of the very expensive fuel, alternative fuel that's going to be likely to be used in future ships. So those technologies are easy to retrofit on ships. So we want to highlight that there are technologies out there that's going to help with the transition to make the cost of using the alternative fuel less intimidating. So that's the pillar 1. Pillar 2 is all about fuel. So what would be the alternative fuel for the maritime sector during the decarbonization transition? This is a question that everybody is asking, and there's no silver bullet. But we believe that it's because shipping industry is a very complex industry. It has so many different segments, the different size of ships used for transporting different cargoes. They are sailing different types of routes. They have a very, very different operational profile. So we believe that there should be, the future should be a mixture of different fuel types or propulsion technologies that's going to apply to different segments. So for example, in the near term, in the shorter in the shorter transportation routes, maybe those like electrification could help, could be feasible. In the longer deep sea shipping, we need more energy dense options like liquid hydrogen, ammonia, methanol. These could all be considered, and this could all be one of the options that the future shipping industry considers. So what we do here is to analyze the technological feasibility of replacing the current fossil fuel with these alternative fuels and their respective propulsion technologies. And we research the feasibility in the way or on the basis of a route. So like I said before, we think that these different fuel and propulsion technologies should apply to different route types or segments. So we use our data, which is the automatic identification system data, AIS data. This is the global sort of GIS data for the ships. We use that data to come up with route characteristics of different shipping segments, and we analyze the energy consumption demand on the route basis, and we look at specific routes and specific ship types to see whether a particular technology or fuel type is technologically feasible. Another major type of analysis we do in terms of fuel, with this transition, is to ensure that the fuels that we are talking about is really delivering greenhouse gas emission reductions. And that means we need to perform robust LCA or life cycle analysis standards to really understand the different fuel pathways. So when we talk about a specific type of fuel, for example, ammonia, there are various pathways out there that's going to make ammonia basically totally different types of fuel in terms of its climate performance. So we really want to make sure that when we talk about specific type of fuel, we are talking about its production pathways, and we are really choosing the one that is going to deliver meaningful reduction in terms of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. And with that, we also analyze the cost of producing different pathways of fuel. And of course, the cost of different pathways of fuel would be very different. And unfortunately, the most green or sustainable fuels that we can produce right now is very expensive. So we understand that, or what we are working on is to help policymakers design policy frameworks that's going to help bring down the cost of producing these like truly renewable fuel types, and at the same time, increase the cost of using not so sustainable fuel. So with this efforts, we can sort of close the gaps between the dirty fuels and the clean fuels. So that leads to our third pillar of our research, which is policy designs. So we look at policies at the international level and at the national level to see, to evaluate the effectiveness of existing policies and policy proposals, and trying to make sure that there's no loopholes, and trying to make sure that the policies are advancing in the way that's going to deliver climate benefits in a cost beneficial way. So we, like I said, we do, our research is focused both globally, which is the policy venue for that is mostly IMO, but we also focus on national and regional policy makings. And our currently the countries that we are focusing on include China, US, EU, Brazil, and we're starting to look at South Korea and Indonesia. So these are, like major shipping countries or countries where there's a lot of shipping activities happen. So for China, I know we can talk about that later when we open up for questions. But in terms of China, basically, I think there's a lot of opportunities for China to be leading this effort. For one, the country has a pretty ambitious decarbonization target, which is what we call carbon neutralization by 2060. And with that, all economic sectors, all industries need to decarbonize, to help realize that goal as a country. And for shipping, definitely it's part of it is going to, whatever pathways it's going to take, is going to deliver similar level of contribution to help the entire country realize that goal. But the country has been doing a lot of voluntary actions to and a lot of pilot projects that's in different places. So they're doing a lot of country-specific efforts to help realize their goal, and they're taking their own pace and they're testing out their own, what's applicable to them. But for internationally speaking, I think China has a lot of potential to contribute to the broader shipping industry. And for one, it's about its shipbuilding industry. So the shipbuilding industry, like China is pretty much number 1 or 2, competing with South Korea in terms of global shipbuilding capacity. And as we transition to a more and more decarbonized world, we need more and more zero-emission ships to be built. And that's going to be putting a huge number of new orders on the market. And I'm sure, China, if they want to maintain their competitiveness in this market, they want to showcase or demonstrate that they are capable of building that type of vessel. And also, with this transition, there's going to be a huge demand for alternative fuels, whatever that fuel is. So it's going to be a mixture of different types of fuel that I just talked about. And for China, there's the country is blessed with huge amount of renewable resources that can be utilized to generate renewable electricity, which is a key feedstock to produce renewable alternative fuels. So I know that one of the shipping companies that Stephen mentioned, Maersk, they have been leading the effort, and they have been using green methanol for their own fleets. So that's their go-to fuel for the future, and they have been sourcing that globally. And recently, they have signed a huge amount of demand contract, off-taker contract for green methanol from China. So China could also take this opportunity to be a hub for bunkering or selling renewable marine fuel to benefit the entire world for the decarbonization future. So yeah, I'll pause there. And
great. Thank you. So no, there's lots to talk about. I'm looking at Kristen. You look like you have a question you want to ask Xiaoli. Is that true? You kind of, because she was talking about the shipbuilding in China. What's did you want to ask a question? You seem to look like you wanted to ask one.
No, I mean, not really a question. I just want to really echo that there is an incredible opportunity to, to harness that massive order book that is already in place and is only going to get bigger in the next few years. And China is in the pole position to really benefit from this major transition. And it still baffles me somewhat that, bearing that in mind, that China is still so reluctant to really support the high ambition measures that are needed to deliver on the existing strategy. Because, and I think this also connects with what Stephen was saying, but the measures that are now being negotiated that will be adopted in early next year are going to be absolutely crucial to meeting this strategy, because those measures will be adopted as amendments to the legally binding MARPOL Convention. And by doing that, they will not allow countries to circumvent them. They are then the first ever global industry-wide set of technical and economic measures that will have been adopted. And that's a massively, I can't overstate how important this is. So I think it still kind of baffles me that China sits kind of in the middle, wanting to commit to that high ambition, but not really acknowledge how much they will benefit from this, only focusing on what they believe to be something that might damage them, for which there is actually no evidence. So I'm kind of trying to understand why China says what it does on the floor at the IMO.
I'd like to contribute
Sure.
to that point. Part of the problem there is that you're dealing with two very large state-owned corporations, COSCO, which is the shipping company, and China Shipbuilding Corporation, which is completely different. The shipbuilders are going to benefit or could benefit from this innovation, and they certainly have the capacity. Xiaoli mentioned China's 1 or 2. Actually, it's number 1 and by a long shot, at least in terms of the order book that you have out there. But COSCO has, and China in general, has a fairly young shipping fleet. They built it themselves fairly recently. And normally, cargo ship is likely to last 20 to 30 years. Bulk carriers a little bit less than that. But, so COSCO is saying, well, we don't want to scrap all these ships that we just bought from China Shipbuilding. And so you have this perverse incentive of the shipping companies having the immediate future and the shipbuilders having the longer term future.
Well, one question that I had, like if in China, I know that because I've done stuff in the past looking at like China's distant fishing fleets, and I know that they get lots of subsidies for their fuels. And I was wondering, I mean, that's one of the policies, Xiaoli, that you don't want countries to be having, because that's going totally against greenhouse gas reductions, right? Do you see, is China still, are they still subsidizing? Do they even subsidize their cargo ships fuel, or?
No, I don't think so. And also like the current, the current regulation that they call it the domestic emission control area, although now it's sort of grandfathered because it's now a global sulfur cap. But before the global sulfur cap kicks in, the domestic emission control area really regulates the fuel sulfur content to actively reduce the SOx emissions and PM emissions that's going to impact the local communities' health conditions. So they are actively doing things, and they are transitioning away from the dirtier versions of a fuel. But they're doing it, like I said, they're at their own pace, and they are allowing certain places to pilot more advanced ideas or more stringent policy frameworks. For example, in Hainan, they are actually the domestic emission control area. The version in Hainan is equivalent to the IMO's emission control area, where the sulfur content of fuel is much less or much more stringent. The regulations are much more stringent there. So that's just one example. I know that the fishing fleet is a very special entity. It's being either subsidized or exempt in many places because of their unique characteristics, because they're usually tied to individuals and their livelihoods, right? So so it's a different story there, but it's a tiny portion of the entire picture. But I would also say that the fishing fleet, we also found that electrification is very feasible in this sector, and it's
Cool.
going to benefit a lot because it's so quiet. It's going to benefit their fishing activities, but it needs a lot of education and subsidies, right? Then the subsidies is not on fuels, but the subsidies on the technology or retrofit or scraping their old vessels to support them to make that transition. So there's also other subsidies in the right direction to help this particular sector to move forward.
Well, actually, on that thought, we got a question from Dr. Gabriela Mundaka from University of Delaware. To all the speakers, how would you suggest financing advanced technologies to substitute the use of fossil fuels in shipping industry, like to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, without implementing carbon tax to fossil fuels? So I guess the question of how do they finance this? I mean, you said already that there's been some subsidies to help the fishing industry maybe retrofit and switch over. Do I maybe start with you, Christian? How do this has to be funded? Who's going to pay?
Well, I think the answer is that you do need that price on greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm just going to ignore that bit of the question, simply because the modeling clearly shows that not having that price on fossil fuels is simply not sufficient to meet the timeline and the scope of the strategy. In order to do that, you need to put a real firm case that fossil fuels are no longer a viable commercial option at two levels. One, it has to become more expensive, but two, it also has to be very, very clear to investors, shipping companies and countries that they will pay significantly more for their shipping, or not for their shipping, but for their fuels, if they do not adopt as quickly as possible whatever they can adopt in terms of clean technologies, fuels, and otherwise. And in order to do that, the main challenge I hear from shipping companies and negotiators is that they want clarity. They don't want something that is variable. They don't want something that is unclear. And that's precisely a part of the challenge with the proposal that China and Brazil put forward, is that you kind of have to pay a little bit for non-compliance with the fuel standard. And that does not offer the clarity, and it doesn't offer the funds to pay for that transition. Now, I want to pick up very quickly on a point that Stephen made around the Marshall Islands and other Pacific states being in the room. The Marshall Islands have been in the room since 2015, when the Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually moved in and took their flag from the registry, which had been at the IMO for a very long time. And they have started working very actively on getting the highest possible ambition on the table, and have been defending that 1.5 aligned strategy and a levy for a long time. Now, I want to slightly correct what you said around the levy, because they're not primarily asking for it to be, to use for climate damage. Their main objective is to actually meet the strategy and decarbonize as quickly as possible, because 1.5 is already too risky for them. I've been to Majuro and I've seen it. I've worked with the Marshall Islands quite closely, and they simply cannot afford this. So in order to get the climate goals, we need that levy. And then it can help pay for the transition in terms of technologies. It can deal with some of the unintended consequences of some countries having some disproportionate negative impact. It can account for at least some of that. And then it can also help the poor countries that do not have the means to put public investment or private investment in this strategy to also come along, because all countries have to be on board and transition as quickly as possible, along with everyone else, to meet that ambitious strategy. And that's why there simply isn't a credible pathway without a high price on greenhouse gas emissions.
All right. Stephen, did you have anything you wanted to add there? We're good? Okay, so someone, Ellen Cooper, she asked the question that it was touched on briefly, that does solar energy have any place as a bridge or additive technology for shipping? And I know that, Xiaoli, you did mention how Maersk was doing green methanol, trying to, make it with renewable energy. Is that, I mean, is solar power, is that going to be one of the main sources for helping to create some of these green fuels? Because I know that, like, with I need to have a meeting on hydrogen, because I know we've got blue and green and all these different types.
Yeah,
I mean,
I guess the question is maybe asking about solar used directly on the ships, but yes, I mean, of course, if you're talking about electricity, they're coming from renewable resources, then solar is definitely one of the main sources that is being explored. But for solar to be the actual power on ships, yes, there are like pilot projects doing that. I don't know, I don't remember the name, but there's a vessel that's actively, I think, making a global trip that's been using all kinds of really like advanced technologies on board the ships, like including liquid hydrogen, direct solar. So there's a big solar panel on top of that ship. Yeah, I think there are like various pilot projects that's being exploring various different ideas, and I think I stand behind my initial comment that there are different technologies applied to different segments, and maybe there's a niche segment out there that's making this direct use of solar panel on top of ships really applicable and economic, which is the best which is the best case scenario, but not I'm not seeing that as a popular option for like a big cargo carrier shipping at this moment, but I'm not ruling out any like novel technology experiments out there. And yeah, I'm sure if a yacht, a personal yacht that's interested in using solar panel, I think that's totally gonna work.
Yeah, no, so what about going back to like your in terms of, we're talking about technology. So Christian, you talked about the sail. Is it I mean, is there anything you want to add to that, or is there any other technology that would help it work even better? Because I think you're using it as kind of a supplement to make, initially as a transition to make the boats more fuel efficient, because all ships can't get off fossil fuels today.
No, exactly. I think it's important to understand that this transition has to be it's simultaneously extremely urgent, but we also have to make sure that we invest in the right way to not lock in so-called transitionary measures that are not actually helping. I'm thinking primarily of LNG, which has been touted as a possible option as a transition fuel, but it is not. It is not actually helping us with this transition, and we have to make sure that the fuel pathways that we are currently investing in do not include any fossil fuels, not in direct use, but also not in creating those fuels. So, relying on gray or other hydrogen as a feedstock into the fuel that we use. So wind, in that sense, actually quite easily gives you very similar immediate cuts to carbon when you shift from distillate or HFO to LNG, but it doesn't have the very annoying side effect of methane slip. So it's because of that methane slip that LNG is not a good option at all, but that if you can cut your emissions by about 20% using wind, then you don't have methane slip, you get the same cut, and it allows you to then invest in a transition fuel that actually works. And what's interesting is that with wind, you have different types of wind propulsion technology right now. You have these rotors that Charles mentioned, you have rigid sails, you have kites, you have you know, you have these different ways that work for different types of ships. You even have modular setups that fit in a container that can be mounted on top of a stack of containers or mounted on deck. There are very innovative ways of harnessing that direct use of wind at sea, and it is in many ways you know, a no-brainer to do that, because it helps us in that immediate transition.
I think when we write up the summary for this, we're going to have to find some photos online, because I really want to picture some of these sails. So I'm going to toss out here for, like, we've talked a little bit more about China and the EU. What about the US? Are we a leader in trying to help this transition, fuels or otherwise, or policies?
John Kerry came here to Wilson Center and spoke about the Oceans Conference. And certainly he has been out there on American policy. The difficulty with the United States is that we have a much smaller ownership fleet than other countries, and an even smaller flag fleet, you know, so that, you know, American policy does not apply to maybe we're 11th in the world in terms of deadweight tons that we have flagged ownership of. But nevertheless, you know, despite his retirement, this continues to be a significant part of the U.S. policy. I believe Sue Binanez is the principal deputy secretary who's responsible for this, and she spoke out on this issue just a few weeks ago. So it's you know, it at least in this administration, it is still being taken very seriously. And you know, the real question will be whether the United States, you know, really steps up in the IMO. We still have an enormous amount of influence there, and you know, by ownership, we have a lot of shipping, you know, so that we can speak with a fair amount of authority for that. We also have particular responsibilities for places like the Northern Marianas, you know, which is the Federated Micronesia, because those are, you know, in a sense, free compact countries that we are responsible for defense and aspects of. And, you know, that they are, you know, we need to work with them simply because that's, you know, countries for whom we have a certain, you know, moral responsibility.
I can't help but think about, as you're talking, I know we're talking about ships, but a number of years ago, I had a project that was looking at green ports and brought some Chinese folks over, and you know, we went out to the port of LA, which for many years has had cooperation with the port of Shanghai, sharing lessons learned, because that's where a lot of where's that ping pong of all those ships, right? It's between Shanghai and the port of LA. And I know the ports are not the same as ships, but I was thinking of it when, Kristen, you were talking, because a lot of Chinese ports have shifted over to LNG to power all the things that load the ship. But has there ever been any conversations, you know, lately? And maybe this is a Shaoli question, between the U.S. and China on cooperating on, you know, the ships, or anyone can take this. I mean, we did it with ports, but ports are different than
well,
ships.
yeah, we've been working on the green corridor idea, and that's been, you know, one area that fortunately hasn't become highly politicized between the U.S. and China, is that we have specific routes that we're looking for green cooperation, and so far they've worked, you know, well, and so hopefully we can keep that quiet given the atmosphere.
We shouldn't be talking about it. No, that's good. Thank you for that, because I knew there was something cooking in that sphere. Just got another question from Elizabeth Goldbaum, a retiree, civilian activist, and philanthropist. She says, could the speakers address who are the largest global engine manufacturers? Is there policy or economic push by the IMO or NGOs to encourage international partnerships and collaboration across the largest shipbuilder engine manufacturers?
Yeah, the biggest manufacturer is MAN, German firm, and they're the primary manufacturers of the low-speed diesel engines that are used in the largest ships. Wärtsilä is a Finnish firm that also does that. There are a fair number of Japanese firms, but it tends to be a European area. And MAN has come out with a new low-speed diesel methanol engine that they're ready to start installing at for a suitable price wherever you want.
So I mean, this sounds. I mean, because these companies that build these engines, they've been around for a long time. They're big, but the way you guys were both all talking, it sounds like that. There's like, I don't know, are there tech entrepreneurs who are also like jumping in the water to kind of help support this kind of clean energy stuff? Like maybe the sales?
Yeah, I mean, as far as fuel, like I can talk about like just an example, not that this is the most popular options out there, the fuel cells system. So there are more and more like you said, like well, I would not call them engine manufacturers, but they're so like novel and new that they build like pilot ships. But primarily the ship itself is mostly the engine. So there are novel systems like fuel cell systems that's being sort of piloted by some new startup companies. And then I know that there are like major battery firms that's used to build batteries just for vehicles. They are building batteries, modular batteries for smaller ships, and because it's modular, they could be stacked up and support larger vessels as well. So, and and there are some like Japanese companies and yeah, several other companies are also like researching on like modular fuel cell systems that could be, but it's still a niche market, like the sort of the more, if you look at the order book, the more demand on sort of alternative fuel ships out there is ammonia ready and methanol ready ships. So it's basically dual fuel engines that are produced by those like major engine companies that Stephen just talked about. It's not too difficult for the for these engine manufacturers to produce those advanced engines as long as it's needed, right? As long as somebody pay the price. But yeah, there are some like newcomers in this field that's bringing in very new technologies into the market.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can pick up on this, because I
Please do.
think I think it's really quite important to reiterate that in many ways the wind propulsion technologies that exist are a form of engines. As I said, I really do not consider wind propulsion to be an efficiency measure, but it's a propulsive technology. So in that sense, a rotor a rotor sail is like an additional engine that provides a part of the propulsive energy. And in that sense, yes, most companies operating in that wind propulsion space are disrupting, that technology provision for ships, and they're adding, a separate segment to the engine manufacturing market. But you also see that some shipping companies are investing in certain technologies. For example, MOL in Japan has very actively invested in wind propulsion for their bulk carriers. You have Wallenius Wilhelmsen, the Norwegian-Swedish company that has been working on its own car carrier that will be primarily wind propelled, up to 80-90% of its energy coming from wind. But you also have other companies which invest in smaller projects, like, for example, CMA CGM from here in Marseille, that invested in Neoline, a company from Brittany, because they all realize that they can't invest in the winner yet because the winner isn't yet known. So they're investing in different kinds of technologies, and the incumbents, from what I can tell, really fear that they're betting on the wrong horse, or they're really hoping that theirs will win. And Maersk went into methanol, CMA CGM went into LNG. MSC is kind of, waiting and seeing what's going to happen. And same with Costco and Evergreen, for example, they're still kind of waiting to see what will be the best bet for them. So like Stephen said, the age of the fleet, but also the available technologies and the available funds really kind of dictate a lot of what is happening. But disruption is coming, and we might see a bit of a shakeup of which companies are really dominant in this field over the next couple of decades.
But it sounds like also that, I mean, this is a massive rethink. I mean, it used to be bunker fuel, oil, go. And now, I mean, I really appreciate the insights that you gave, Xiaoli, about how studying the different routes, the different functions, that maybe the ecosystem, but decarbonizing is going to be a little bit more complex. And I know that companies don't like complexity, but I think that it sounds like, and Stephen, can you kind of, do you feel like the IMO, like where they're going, that there's a seriousness, or Christian, that you know, that, I mean, it sounds like the shipbuilding industry and the shipping companies are they're taking action because they know that a carbon price is coming. Yeah.
Right. One of the things that the 2018 resolution put forward was this idea that you have to study a variety of, you know, reducing carbon emissions that doesn't involve building a new ship. It means, for instance, you know, getting rid of you know, biological things hanging off your ship, scraping off the barnacles, you know, as well as other, you know, basic stuff. Routing, making sure that you're doing the routing, you know, in the most efficient manner, and slowing down, you know, and that's, you know, that's a hard sell, because when you think about it as a shipping firm, the faster you can get across the Pacific, the faster you can turn around and get across the Pacific again. But that is substantially increasing that. And so, you know, convincing everyone that there should be a speed limit on cargo ships, particularly container ships, they're the ones that are really trying to punch that through. That's going to be a hard sell. And they've actually talked about technologies that are like a governor. You know, I don't know if you ever remember it on cars, you know, back in the day, you had these governors that you couldn't go more than 55 miles an hour, you know, and this would be essentially the same technology on top of a ship, you know. So, you know, that there are, you know, ideas that it can be done fairly easily, but you have to convince everybody to adhere to the same rules.
Okay, we got 3 minutes left. I want to maybe do a quick round robin about, you know, what didn't you have time to say, or you know, you feeling optimistic, or what do you want to see happening by the IMO? Pick your question. Christian?
I mean, I would want to just pick up on the last thing that Stephen said about having the same rules for everyone. And that's both the strength of the IMO and the fear of some member states, that having that general rule is something that's quite tricky in climate negotiations because of, you know, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Basically, it means that you treat countries differently. But in an industry that is so global, that needs the same rules for everyone, it poses a problem. And some countries want to address that inequality with exemptions, which seems very ineffective in environmental terms, where some other countries really want to say, okay, there will be unequal outcomes and disproportionate impacts, but let's address them after the fact, because we need to absolutely bring those emissions down first. And again, that's where that levy comes in, but it creates a level playing field. It creates a situation where everyone has to stick to the same rules, and then we find a way to make sure that that does not drive countries further into poverty, because no one wants that.
No. Xiaoli?
Okay, I'm gonna leave with maybe a unpopular warnings is to think twice before you embark on a cruise ship. Because cruise ships, you know, believe it or not, on a per ship basis, they are emitting far more emissions, both in terms of air pollutants as well as, you know, climate pollutants, are much more than a regular cargo carrier. So if you could choose a more environmentally friendly cruise ship, which is going to be more expensive, do so. If not, maybe, you know, do a a bike trip around your neighborhood. That could be also relaxing.
Yeah. No, actually, I remember years ago when I learned about how cruise ships used to just dump their waste right into the ocean. It's just sad. So, well, I think we're gonna have to have a cruise ship meeting down the road. But yeah, no, thank you for that. Okay, any warnings or advice or fine note to close us out with, Stephen?
The one kind of warning is that one of the difficulties of the IMO is that it isn't a very transparent organization. And so there's an enormous amount of horse trading going on right now between countries that want a very aggressive move on decarbonization. And those countries, and it's not just China, it's Brazil, it's Argentina, it's Chile, it's Norway. There's a long list of characters out there that are reluctant to move quickly. And so I think, if we can do the world a favor, it's keep your eye on London, because that's where important things are going to happen, and hopefully they will happen in a relatively open manner.
Okay, we need transparency. We got to keep an eye on London. Also, the Jack Christian said, "Hey, shall we take a sailing trip instead of the cruise ship?" But yeah, but I want to thank you three for a great conversation today. A little bit PowerPoint light. It was good. 1 out of 3. That's a perfect balance, I think. And yeah, and I think we're gonna keep having this conversation about the shipping industry and read Christian's book and eventually Stephen's book. And Shali, you need to write a book too. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you around. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.